0.1. They allege that evolution assigns an objective purpose of reproduction. Do they also allege that gravity assigns an objective purpose to plummet? 0.2. Feminism desires equality of the sexes. Gender describes the assignment of unequal social standards and expectations to the sexes. The logical conclusion of feminism is the abolition of women and men, the abolition of gender. 0.3. One's enjoyment is said to justify the blatant depravity exhibited by the meat industry. If enjoyment justifies evil, very rarely has any evil been unjustified. By what right does one look down on the sadist? 0.4. The meritocratic nature of capitalism is often asserted. And if everyone worked extremely hard and terribly smart, would the economy consist solely of rich entrepreneurs with not a bricklayer or checkout person in sight? 0.5. One draws up categorizations of good and evil with not a thought, but the rational mind knows of no luxury. Deafening questions echo throughout the mind. What makes it so, and why should anyone care? 0.6. They call loyalty a virtue. Is it virtuous to be loyal to the depraved and wicked? 0.7. They call honesty a virtue. Is it virtuous to be honest with an unjust authority? 0.8. They call generosity a virtue. Is it virtuous to generously fund the cruel and brutal? 0.9. Much that is virtuous so easily becomes a vice, and much that is vice so easily becomes virtuous. 1. They call it moral thought. In truth, it is too often simply an attempt to reconcile the intuitive, irrational preference with the most compatible moral system. An attempt to give respectability to stupidity through the construction of an enveloping facade. 1.1. To assert that there is no God is arrogant. To claim that you are personally supported and loved by the ultimate divine authority is modest. 1.2. Pride is sinful. The fool has an exaggerated sense of his self-importance. I utter these words with the support of the most powerful being in the universe. 1.3. In truth, there are two gods. They call one pain and the other pleasure. 1.4. The basis of reason is pain and pleasure. The rational actor considers its capacity for suffering. 1.5. What does a rational actor desire if not a kind and caring society? What does a rational actor oppose if not a cruel and brutal society? The rational actor must act in a manner reflective of the rational desire. 1.6. What is irrational if not the corrosion of empathy and compassion? What is irrational if not the normalization of cruelty and brutality? What is irrational if not the undermining of respect for sentience? 1.7. It is not uncommon that one will pretend values, views, opinions, ideologies, philosophies, in short ideas, are beyond judgment. What a tremendous idiocy this is. Rational desirability, usefulness, worth. Has one forgotten the tools of judgment out of fear of what they may discover? 1.8. The more the social group is brutalized, the more normalized that brutality becomes, and the more desensitized one is to it. Brutality is a cyclical force, which strips people of their moral worth and paves the way for further brutality. 1.9. So often the importance of cautious progress is lost in a forest of revolutionary haste. The urgency of the rush towards success will see one collapse halfway there. What good is a hasty success if it is not a success at all? 2. An irrational terror of death is a cruel gift of natural selection. The curse of the living is to live in fear of death. 2.1. One is so often inclined to screech and wail about the liberty of animals crushed by the zoo. Does one consider what liberty means for animals? The only freedom valued by the state of nature is the freedom to suffer. 2.2. A horde asserts that morality is an objective matter. Half of their ranks know nothing but wishful thinking. The other half know nothing but immense arrogance. 2.3. Play with labels at your own risk. The label is as much an enemy of human liberty as any tyrant. And yet so many eagerly strip themselves of liberty for any semblance of self-knowledge. 2.4. Supposedly homosexuality is a cause of confusion among children. What is to be expected when it defies the lies of an absolutely heterosexual world? The parent manufactured a confusion and now enjoys nothing more than whining about it. 2.5. It is not about what is true so much as it is about what is useful. The truth only matters insofar as it is useful. 2.6. Some allege that we need God because without God there can be no morality. If morality has any value and rational desirability independently of God, which must be the case unless this argument is circular, then we don't need God to have morality. 2.7. Some of the greatest enemies lie within one's own mind. The internal irrationalities love nothing more than the infliction of immense misery and colossal suffering. 2.8. Free will is an inconceivable, magical concept that defies all attempts at any serious understanding of possibility. An intuitive reality born out of the immense complexity and utter intricacy of human consciousness. And like so many intuitive realities, it dies to human reason. 2.9. The retributive desire is at its strongest immediately after the act occurs or one is made aware of it. From the moment of knowing, the desire fades with time. Clearly demonstrated is the emotional, impulsive, and irrational character of the retributive desire. 3. Some certainly regard progress as something that is beyond undoing. So many comforting delusions are caked in falsity. 3.1. Some will oppose the abolition of gender. Some slaves fall in love with their chains, for they know of nothing else. 3.2. The realist dismisses the value of ideas, and yet realism is an idea, reality is an idea. The reasoning behind their dismissal of ideas is founded on countless ideas. 3.3. It is through ideas that one grasps reality. It is through ideas that one makes sense of it and interacts with it. 3.4. Amongst the political left, nothing is more popular than political slogans that make one sound more radical and less reasonable than they really are. The use of such slogans is consistently indicative of stupid beliefs or idiotic rhetoric. Some find nothing more enjoyable than straw-manning themselves. 3.5. Some suggest that we should give up hope of success. Nothing guarantees failure so much as the idea that failure is guaranteed. There is no surer way of making success impossible than regarding it as such. 3.6. You are not politically neutral. One either does support human rights or one does not. One has no choice but to adopt a political position. 3.7. So many believe the right things for the wrong reasons, quite often for no reason at all. Such people have an inclination to so easily fall from grace. 3.8. We sit back and righteously condemn the dogmatism of the depraved. The festering cancer of dogma is often far closer than we so naively think. It does infect our enemies, but it also infects our friends, and so very often us. 3.9. Human nature is not inherently good or inherently evil. It has been demonstrated time and time again what it is: the capacity for great good and immense evil. 4. People being equal does not necessarily imply that they are worth treating as such. People being unequal does not necessarily imply that they are worth treating as such. 4.1. The autocrat has made a confession. The autocrat thinks that the people are too stupid to rule themselves. 4.2. A free decision implies freedom from the influence of one's environment or nature. How does one make a decision free from the influence of their environment or nature? One is inclined to wonder. 4.3. Too often, spite and retributive desire is born out of poor treatment. Being wronged is not a justification of one's descent into cruelty and brutality, and nor should one let they who wronged them deprive them of their goodness. 4.4. Every action communicates an idea. Every action has a meaning. Every action normalizes itself. Every action establishes a precedent. Every action represents a justification of a fundamental essence. 4.5. They allege that nothing matters because it is all just temporary, and yet the prospect of facing temporary pain will not inspire indifference in them. It is the nature of temporary beings to be dominated by temporary forces. 4.6. It would appear that an eternal rest, an eternal sleep, is guaranteed. One can surely find some comfort in such a prospect. One who lives their life well will be ready for the rest, at least as ready as they can be. They will descend into it with not a hint of regret. 4.7. Some allege that objective meaning and purpose dies with God. A purpose built on lies is many things. Objective it is not. One does not face death if one never lived. 4.8. One selects an axiom. Yet a conscious selection process necessitates a selection reasoning. An axiom founded on reasoning is not an axiom at all. 4.9. The nihilists often claim that nothing can be known. If one can know that nothing can be known, then something can be known. 5. Many an irrational blunder is made. Confusing one's intuition for a detector of objectivity is perhaps the greatest. 5.1. Perhaps the greatest of misconceptions is the idea that self-interest and that which is good are very often in conflict. How is anything good if not through self-interest? 5.2. We are terribly good at spotting the immoralities of other societies. We would have done something had we lived back then. But we live now, and we do nothing, and are blind to everything. 5.3. Why should I care? No question encourages philosophical claims to crumble, quite like this one. 5.4. One uses words that describe hideous things so very liberally. One downplays the hideous things. 5.6. The depraved criminal has committed the crime of normalizing cruelty and brutality, eroding empathy and compassion, and undermining respect for sentience. Why echo his crime in his punishment? One is not undoing the wrong so much as they are adding to it. 5.7. Every action is a universal justification of its fundamental essence. Be careful what you justify. 5.8. The haunting spectre of a hyper-rational, amoral pragmatist generates immense awe in many. In truth, the spectre is nothing but a phantom. The rational are not amoral. 5.9. Not one culture evades rational moral judgment. Culture is not a shield to hide behind, so much as it is a carcass to be picked at by the vultures of reason. 6. What is a woman? Such semantic games have one answer: whatever it is rationally desirable to consider as such. 6.1. We tell people how they should act. We issue moral claims. And yet we so often fail to give any reason as to why people should act in that way. 6.2. Nothing makes one feel so bold as proclaiming that they are a realist. Does anyone not regard themselves as such? 6.3. The history of humanity is the history of cruelty and brutality. The past would struggle to be more clogged with depravity, and yet so many remain so unaware of the human capacity for such things. 6.4. The rational actor must adopt a rational approach, an often imaginative, personalized method of perceiving, ideal for their comfort, satisfaction, and well-being. 6.5. The axiom is one thing and one thing only: a glorified dogmatic preference.